a baby very badly. Finally, they had a little girl, so they held a banquet to celebrate their daughter with the kingdom. Naturally, all of the fairies in the kingdom were invited. All of the guests hurried to the castle for the grand event. Now, there were 13 fairies altogether. 12 lived in the hills and the fields and forests of the kingdom, but the 13th fairy lived high on a jagged mountain to the south of the kingdom. She kept to herself and thus, after a long time, was forgotten. It was a splendid party. After a wonderful meal, the fairies each took a turn blessing the small child. One by one, the fairies walked over to the crib, looked down at the child, and blessed her with wonderful qualities.
I wish you to be beautiful. I wish you to be kind.
Before the last fairy was going to give her blessing, the 13th fairy appeared. The guards jumped to attention. They held their swords and were ready for anything except for the 13th fairy. She stood proudly and said, "What a lovely party."
What a lovely party.
Too bad I was not invited.
Too bad I was not invited.
The king and the queen were terrified. They had forgotten the 13th fairy and knew there would be trouble. The 13th fairy walked over to the crib and looked down at the baby. She looked at the other fairies and said, "I see you have all blessed this child."
I see you have all blessed this child.
I too have a gift for her.
I too have a gift for her.
Everyone in the castle looked nervous. The 13th fairy looked again at the baby and said, "When the princess is 16 years old,
When the princess is 16 years old,
she will prick her finger on a spindle,
she will prick her finger on a spindle,
and she will die."
and she will die.
Everyone gasped with horror. The 13th fairy laughed an evil laugh, and she vanished. The queen began to cry. The 12th fairy stepped up to the throne and
The
said,
13th fairy's magic is powerful. I cannot completely change it. When she turns 16, she will prick her finger, but she will not die. She will only sleep for 100 years.
The queen and the king said to the fairy, "Thank you for your kindness.
Thank you for your kindness.
It gives us hope."
It gives us hope.
But everyone was terribly worried as they left the party that night. The king and the queen called their guards.
Guards!
The guards stood at attention, and they bowed before the king and queen, and they were sent off to ride through the land, telling everyone in the kingdom to destroy their spinning wheels. The guards left and covered the whole kingdom in a short amount of time. When they returned, they bowed before the king and queen, and they said, "All the spinning wheels were destroyed."
All the spinning wheels have been destroyed.
The king and the queen were relieved. The years passed, and the princess grew up into a lovely girl. She was, in fact, everything that the fairies wished her to be. On the morning of her 16th birthday, the princess awoke, stretched, yawned, and was very excited. She went to sit with her parents at the throne. The queen said, "You must stay out of the way."
You must stay out of the way.
that door, she found a staircase. She had never seen this staircase before, so she began to climb it. When she got to the top, she saw a beautiful woman at the top of the stairs in a little room. The woman was quietly spinning on a spinning wheel. The princess was curious, so she walked over and stood beside the woman. The princess said, "What are you doing?"
What are you doing?
The woman looked up and smiled, and she said, "My dear, I am spinning.
My dear, I am spinning.
Would you like to try?"
Would you like to try?
The princess was excited, and she said, "Oh yes, please."
Oh yes, please.
The woman showed her the spindle, and as she reached her hand out, she pricked her finger on it. The princess looked at her hurt finger and said, "Ouch!
Ouch!
She looked up at the lovely woman and yawned. The princess slowly sank into the cushions of her bed. The 13th fairy laughed an evil laugh,
Mwahahaha!
and then she vanished. In the castle, all the guests had arrived for the celebration. Naturally, all the fairies attended. The first fairy sensed that there was something wrong, and she said, "The princess has fallen asleep,
The princess has fallen asleep,
and we can't wake her."
and we can't wake her.
The fairies had a quick meeting. They whispered a few ideas until a plan was formed. They decided that the whole castle must be put under the spell so no one would have to suffer without their princess. Each fairy whirled about the room, and as they passed, everyone fell asleep. The king and the queen grew tired and fell asleep at their thrones. The guards fell asleep into a deep slumber, and the fairies even decided to put themselves to sleep so they may protect the royal family until the 100 years had passed. Then a wild hedge of roses grew up over the whole castle, hiding it from view. 100 years later, a prince was riding through an abandoned land. He gazed up at the sun, and he realized there was a small tattered flag waving above some heavy undergrowth. So he decided to investigate. The prince hopped off of his horse and stabled him and lifted his blade to cut through the brambles. To his surprise, the moment the blade touched the branch, the vines fell away and revealed a path. He followed the path into the castle. Imagine his surprise and confusion as he walked through the castle full of people, all sound asleep. He said, "Hello!"
Hello?
But the people only snored and sighed. Then the prince came upon the stairs that had intrigued the princess 100 years ago. He climbed them, and at the top of the stairs, he found the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. He bent down carefully and tapped her on the shoulder. The princess's eyes slowly opened, and she carefully sat up and gave a dainty yawn. She looked at him and let out a surprised "Oh!"
Oh!
In that castle, the "Oh" woke everyone up, and soon the king and the queen, the fairies, and the guards all stretched and yawned and rubbed their eyes. The prince said, "You are the loveliest girl I have ever met."
You are the loveliest girl I've ever met.
The princess smiled and looked shy as she said, "Thank you."
Thank you.
The prince was in love. Never had a beautiful girl looked so modest when complimented. He helped her to her feet and said, "Will you marry me?"
Will you marry me?
The princess smiled and giggled. She said, "We have to ask my parents first."
We have to ask my parents first.
So they went to the throne. The prince bowed to the king and the queen, and he said, "May I marry your daughter?"
May I marry your daughter?
The king and the queen looked to the fairies. They were all saying, "Say yes, say Yes. The king stood up and answered in his most dignified and official voice, "Yes, you may."
Yes, you may.
The fairies and the guards all cheered.
Hey!
Since the castle still looked beautiful after all of these years, they held the wedding that very day. But not before a guard was sent to the mountain to invite the 13th fairy. She was so pleased to be invited that she herself blessed their marriage. She said, "May you live happily ever after."
May you live happily ever after.
The princess, the prince,